Welcome to Connect and Collaborate with Icosa, empowering leaders to lead. Today's broadcast is one of many in a series about the life and times of Jim Salestrom. Jim Salestrom is an Emmy Award-winning musician. He has been performing with leaders in the entertainment field. Dolly Parton and John Denver have encouraged and influenced Jim, and he has seen a great deal of the world as a professional musician because of them. Jim's music and charm have connected him to U.S. presidents, U.S. senators, Supreme Court justices, as well as artists, musicians, and captains of industry. Icosa magazine shares stories about people that are connecting, collaborating, and communicating to build innovative solutions to reach each other's goals. Icosa magazine believes Jim Salestrom is one of the most connected people on the planet. Here's Jim Salestrom.
Welcome back. My name is Jim Salestrom. This project is part of an ongoing series of stories about my life that I am producing for the Icosa magazine. And I have just finished telling the story of playing with Dolly Parton in Washington, D.C. with Jimmy Carter and how much fun that was. And it was a place for me to start to tell my story. My name is James Kevin Salestrom, and I was born in Omaha, Nebraska on February 20th, 1956. Welcome back. My name is Jim Salestrom. This project is part of an ongoing series of stories about my life that I am producing for the Icosa magazine. And I have just finished telling the story of playing with Dolly Parton in Washington, D.C. with Jimmy Carter and how much fun that was. And it was a place for me to start to tell my story. My name is James Kevin Salestrom, and I was born in Omaha, Nebraska on February 20th, 1956. My dad's name is Virgil Eugene Leonard Salestrom. 3 names, that's kind of the Swedish way. And my mom's name is Janice June Koppel Salestrom, and they both were raised in small farming communities in Nebraska, in Central America, as I always tell everyone. My dad's hometown was Genoa, which is about 21 miles from Columbus, Nebraska, and my mom is from Bancroft, which is in the northeastern corner of the state. My dad worked as a salesman and traveled all over Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa, and he sold auto parts for an auto parts wholesaler called Seidels. And Seidels is spelled S-I-D-L-E-S, Seidels Automotive. And they had about 73 branches around the Midwest. So they were really quite a large company. And my mom was a registered nurse, and she had received her nursing degree from Bishop Clarkson Hospital in Omaha, and that's where all 3 of us boys were born. They met in Omaha, and they had my older brother, Charles Brayton Salestrom, Chuck, in 1952, and then I was born in 1956, and my younger brother, Thomas Rockney Salestrom, was born in 1958. We all lived in a small town, a suburb of Omaha, in a small house that my parents built in Ralston, Nebraska. And that has since, grown. All these towns have grown to be much, much larger. But that was a great place to start a family and to raise 3 young boys. I always will remember there was music in our house. My folks always had a wonderful stereo, wonderful radio. And I think that my mom has since told me that she used to listen to Johnny Carson on a radio show in Omaha before he went to New York. And I'll always remember there was music. There was always music. If there wasn't music on the radio, my mom or dad were singing. And I remember music in the church, and we always went to church, since we were babies. I remember the music from the church, and I also remember going to a preschool for kids that had an aptitude towards music. My mom took me to this preschool a few times, and I remember learning about quarter notes and dunking Oreo cookies in cold milk. Those seem to have gone hand in hand throughout my life. I had a girlfriend when I was 4 years old. Her name was Sue Pluggy, and she was cute. She had curly blonde hair, and I think I got to walk her home from school when I was in kindergarten once. When I was in kindergarten, there was a little girl who we all kind of fell in love with. She was special. She had Down syndrome, and she passed away while we were in kindergarten. And our teachers, parents, loved ones all explained it to us in such a way that they said that, she was in heaven, she was with God, and all was well. And even though we were so sad, and I still remember those feelings of being sad, I am amazed that our parents and our teachers were so incredibly sensitive and gave us such a great lesson about life and death. Ralston Elementary School was attached to the middle school, and then that was attached to the high school. I remember getting polio vaccines there on a Sunday afternoon. I also remember we had these raids. We had these trial raids that we had to go through all the time, where we had to get under our desks and stay away from the windows and hide. And they were for tornadoes, but they were also for the threat of a nuclear attack. Being so close to Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, which was just about 8 miles away, most of the people in our neighborhoods worked at Offutt Air Force Base. They were colonels or lieutenant colonels in the service. And so that's something that I always remember. SAC Air Force Base, Offutt Air Force Base, was a strategic air command base, and being located right in the middle of the country, we had some very interesting things happening there that I found out about later as a grown-up. They had an airplane called the Eye in the Sky, and the Eye in the Sky, there were two. One would take off as one was landing, and it had all of the nuclear codes and all the capabilities of keeping our country protected in case we got a strike from Russia. And Omaha was definitely on the target map for the Russians. And so when all of the things happened in October with President Kennedy, we were definitely aware of that. And at one time in our lives, I think I was in the first grade, Mom got my brothers and I in the car, and we started driving towards Kansas City. And the reason we did that was because one of the neighbors called and said, "It's really, really looking serious, and you don't want to be here. You should take your family and go." Yeah, I remember our neighbors were the Picketts. They had a son named Pep Pickett. His dad was a colonel in the Air Force, and his mother called our mom and said, "You ought to pack it up and you ought to head south." And I remember my mom taking it very seriously and doing just that. That was the 4 days in October scenario, 4 days in October. A lot has been written about that since then. We had a little black Cocker Spaniel dog named Pokey, and Pokey was just amazing. He would run around the neighborhood and chase all the birds out of the trees when we drove up our hill to our driveway at our little house. And we also had walnut trees in the backyard, and that made for some very dangerous fights. I remember throwing walnuts and getting hit with walnuts all the time. Yeah, if you threw a walnut and hit a kid in the head, you could kill him. So we had to stop. We had to stop doing that. We had a really steep hill, and we used to take flexible flyers, these sleds, and we would go screaming down the street at the top of the hill. We'd have a kid at the bottom that would say, bail, or it's okay to go across the busy road. And if you bailed, you always would run your sled into a snowbank, and you would break every button off your coat. You would just snap them off. They'd pop right off. We'd show up every afternoon in the winter with hands full of buttons. My mom had to sew so many buttons onto our snow parkas. And I also remember seeing Sputnik as a child. I think I must have been 5 years old. It probably was about 1961. And I remember seeing Sputnik and all the neighbors being outside and looking up at the sky and seeing this small little star kind of thing going by. And that was the first satellite, or one of the first satellites ever launched. Yeah, I need to go back here just for a second. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's what was going on when we got that phone call. Okay, moving on. And Chuck remembers this time when moms wouldn't let us go outside and play. And I don't remember it, but evidently there were two killers on the loose, and they were just nuts. And it was Charles Starkweather and Carol Fugate, and they had killed her parents, and they were on a killing rampage. And they were just, it was just one of those crazy things where they snapped and they decided they could get away with murder. And so they were supposedly somewhere around Omaha in the area, and we couldn't go out and play. We went to our first McDonald's with Aunt Charlotte and Uncle George. I think the hamburgers were 10 cents, and they were delicious. It was amazing. That was such a new concept around the world and in our world. Charlotte and George were like second parents to us. They didn't have any children of their own. It was my mom's older sister, and she was a nurse also. And my Uncle George ended up down the road many years later being my dad's business partner in Kearney. I also remember being a model one time for a Gordman's fashion show. I think I must have been 4 years old. I remember making a model car and entering it in a model car contest and winning a ribbon. And I remember buying my very first single, my very first record was Haley Mills from The Parent Trap. And she was singing, "Let's get together, yeah, yeah, yeah. We can have a swinging time. Let's get together, what do you say? We can have a swinging time. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, yeah, da-da-da-da-da. Together, yeah, yeah, yeah." Oh, yeah, and there was Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I remember everybody making such a big fuss about that. And somehow, some way, that had to make a big impact and influence my life as far as wanting to have a guitar. My parents, Jan and Verge, were both really, really good singers. They had beautiful voices. They had played clarinet in high school, and they sang, just up until recently in the Lutheran Church, they sang in the choir every Sunday. And my dad had a beautiful tenor voice, and my mom had a beautiful soprano voice. And as I said before, they were always singing to us, or there was always music in our house and in our lives. And that, of course, makes such an impact and an influence on a young person's life. Our parents took us to the Omaha Symphony, and they took us to the circus, and we got to do a lot of fun things at a place called Peony Park. And I remember Charlotte and Mom taking me downtown to the Orpheum Theater where I got to see a movie called Gigi. And I remember standing up on a chair and singing that at the top of my lungs till my mom had to take me out in the lobby and tell me to shut up. But, there was just tons of music in our lives. Now I'm jumping ahead. Now it's 2007. It's New Year's Eve. I'm in Denver at a theater, and we are about to go on stage, and I get to sing and play with John Denver's band. And John Denver was my hero. I was a big fan of his music and of his life, and he was a friend. And to be with bandmates and people that he played music with on stage is a real honor and something that I will cherish all my life. And this is really a special New Year's Eve. He would have been 63 tonight. It's a bittersweet evening. When I first did this 10 years ago in Aspen at the Wheeler Opera House with Chris O'Connor and all of the people from John Denver's band, getting to sing the lead, I kept expecting him to walk around the corner of the stage, around the curtain, and say, "Just what the heck do you think you're doing?" And I was really wishing that would happen, and of course it didn't. But everybody was so emotional that first year, and I still get emotional thinking about that guy. So Pam's in the audience. There's a pretty large audience. The tickets are $100 a night, and it's New Year's Eve. And John would have been 64, not 63. And so we worked up When I'm 64 in honor of his birthday, which is New Year's Eve. I'm thinking back to all those New Year's Eves that I've played as a musician and all the wild and crazy times that I've had. If I just think back to the New Year's Eves that I played with Timberline, there were at least 8. And we played the Holiday Inn and the Back Lot. These are in Kearney, Nebraska. The Holiday Inn, the Back Lot, and the Fireside Inn, which was just rocking and rolling. We had a great time. Those were incredible nights, and we made a lot of people happy. I sure remember that. Then I think back to playing with Dolly Parton on New Year's Eve, all the different places that we played, some that stand out. I remember playing at the Diplomat Hotel in Hollywood, Florida. I remember a comedian named Freddie Roman who was really famous in the Catskills. He opened for Dolly. I remember Harrah's at Lake Tahoe. What an amazing place. They used to block off the streets. People would party, and then they'd bring in a front end loader, like a great big scoop truck kind of thing to pick up all the glass. I also remember playing in Tacoma, Washington, which is near Seattle, at the Tacoma Dome. And that place rocked. People would stomp their feet, and you would think that the earth was quaking. You'd think that it was all coming down. Remember the first night that everybody started stomping their feet in this giant tent bubble kind of place, the Tacoma Dome. And Dolly looked at me like, should we be leaving? Should we be running out the door right now? And I didn't know exactly how to answer that. I guess that was just their way of saying they really loved the show. It was amazing to us. We played both times on New Year's Eve with Kenny Rogers, and I will always remember that there was no place to go when the show was over. Both times, New Year's Eve, we just went over across the street to this hotel, and nothing was open. There was no place to go for a beer, no place to go for breakfast. That was it. That was it. You just went to bed, and you got up the next morning and flew back home. There was New Year's Eve at the Forum in Inglewood, California. We flew to Los Angeles and played the Forum on New Year's Eve. Can you imagine how crazy that was? That was nuts. I think that was a Kenny Rogers date also. Oh yeah, Inglewood is not a very safe place to be. And New Year's Eve was no exception to the rule. Somehow we made it back to our hotel and made it back home. That always seems to be the luck of the Irish or the luck of the Swedish. We always make it safe home. I've played with the Wild Jimbos up in Portland, Oregon, and there have been many, many New Year's in Breckenridge and Summit County, Colorado, where we lived for about 20 years. Lots of happy memories, and New Year's Eve is always a night that if you're a musician, that the chances are you're going to be working and everybody gets paid a little bit more on those nights. So New Year's Eve is a good thing. 2006, I was at Warren Miller's house in Big Sky, Montana at the Yellowstone Club. And Warren Miller, as you may or may not know, is a very famous ski film director, producer, creator. Warren Miller's been making ski films since 1947, and he's a legend in the skiing world. And to be with him was really special. He and Lori and Lori's son, their son Colin, we had a really great time. And New Year's at the Yellowstone Club at Warren Miller's home was something I'll always remember. So this is the end of 2007, and it's been an incredible year. I don't think I've ever worked as hard as I have this year. I took 83 and a half flights on United and traveled all over the country and some all over the world. And I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to have my family and to be alive and to get to do it all doing something I really love, and that's playing music and singing songs. Okay, well, I think that wraps this one up. I'm looking forward to telling you more about my life, and if you're not bored to tears, I'd love it if you'd come back to this website and listen to another podcast. I'm grateful to you for listening, and I'm grateful to Icosa Magazine for sponsoring my story. I'm Jim Salestrom. Thanks a million.
Thank you for listening to Connect and Collaborate with Icosa, featuring Jim Salestrom, empowering leaders to lead. For more information, please visit icosa.com and/or jimsalestrom.com.